All right, if you've held theistic beliefs for any length of time, it's likely you've either been asked or have asked yourself the question, who created God? This is actually a question that has intrigued humanity for centuries. Atheists, agnostics, and theists alike have all wrestled and continue to wrestle with this question. It seems to be a question that we can't seem to wrap our minds around, right? So I want to try to do that in this video and just talk about some of the things that we kind of forget to take into consideration when wrestling with a question like this. Now, I know I started this video by talking about how this is a common question that theists have to answer, and it certainly is. I'm definitely not denying that. I mean, we are the ones who say that we believe in God, and so it is perfectly understandable that some people have some follow-up questions for us in response to that affirmation. And I guess my goal here in this video is to provide an answer to that question and to help us consider the different aspects that tend to be forgotten when wrestling with a question like this. However, it's really important that I should note this out the outset, because even though this is a common question posed in response to the theistic claims of God's existence, I'm not going to be representing all of theism in this video. Instead, I'm going to be discussing Christianity's response in particular to this question. So I apologize in advance if you are a theist. I'm sorry, but I'm not sorry. I'm a Christian, so I can only answer in a way that a Christian would to this question. So I understand that may disappoint some of you, but it's important to note that not every religion has the same beliefs about God, and we don't tend to talk about the same God in the same way, right? Some religions see God as nature, or believe in a multitude of gods, or see God as the sun or the moon or the stars, etc. Therefore, my response may not sufficiently answer this question within the context of those religious beliefs. That's why I wanted to clarify early in the video that this is a Christian response to the question, not a comprehensive theistic one, right? There's a difference. Now, typically when you hear this question asked, you will hear it in the context where an atheist is cross-examining a theist, or in this case, a Christian, about their belief in God. You know, in response to the Christian's affirmation of the existence of God, the atheist may say something to the effect, if God created the world, then who created him? Right? And now, if the Christian is a new convert, or if he simply just haven't been faced with a question like that, then they will kind of freeze and say something like, well, let me get back to you on that one. And then proceed to run to their pastor to see if he has an answer to the question. And if the Christian is lucky, then the pastor will have an answer to this sort of question. But unfortunately, we don't live in a time where that can be assumed, right? Most pastors are just, unfortunately, some glorified TED Talk speakers or entertainers than they are spiritual guides. But that's just a conversation for another day. I don't want to get too much into the weeds in that one. The point being made is that a lot of Christians find themselves in these types of situations. And unfortunately, it is moments like these that breed different type of responses from Christians or people who profess to be Christian, right? For some, this question may actually challenge them to seriously consider Peter's charge in 1 Peter chapter 3 verses 14 to 16, which tells us to be prepared to make a defense to anyone who asks you for a reason for the hope that is inside you, right? For that person, they may be, up, and it may get them riled up, right? For others, though, it may push them to have a type of Kierkegaardian fideism or a type of blind faith, if you will. And I actually want to take a moment to kind of define those two terms real quick for those who may not know who Soren Kierkegaard was or what fideism is, because I actually think this is really important. And you see this a lot in today's age. So Soren Kierkegaard was a Danish theologian and philosopher who posited the argument that God's existence cannot be certainly known, and that the decision to accept faith is neither founded on nor needs rational justification, right? So it was this belief that led him to embrace what we call fideism, which is the doctrine that says knowledge solely depends on faith or revelation. And with his kind of acceptance of fideism, he later became the founder of what we now call Christian existentialism, which is something that I'm not going to, discuss in this video. That's probably a little bit too much for the sake of this video. Really, we want to scale it back to just talk about the Kierkegaardian fideism, right? But here's what you got to know for the sake of this video, right? Is that to Kierkegaard, the focus of theology, in his estimation, was on the individual grappling with their subjective truth rather than a set of objective claims. For example, this would be tantamount to someone saying that they believed in God, not because they were convinced of any rational argument for his existence, and maybe they don't feel like there can be a rational argument to prove the existence of God, right? But rather because they fell in love with his love or power or spirit, and it just changed their lives, right? Their subjective experience is what then determines their belief in God. And so, as you can imagine, Kierkegaard actually probably had much to say about Paul's argument for the existence of God in Romans chapter 1, because obviously if you ever read Romans chapter 1, when it gets to like the 21, 22, it talks about how we all kind of know that God exists by, observing nature and things of that nature, right? So if Paul and Kierkegaard would have lived in the same time, Kierkegaard would have said, absolutely not. I don't agree with you that we all kind of know that God exists, right? We probably have subjective experiences that validate that claim that God exists, but we don't know rationally. We can't prove that. Now, this is not to say that your subjective spiritual experience is in some way invalidated or false. Many people hold to truths that are subjective. Again, for example, I like strawberry ice cream. I think it tastes good. That is true for me. However, that truth is subjective because someone else may think otherwise. I know a lot of people who really don't like strawberry ice cream. Some people prefer chocolate, things of that nature. Therefore, I cannot say objectively that strawberry ice cream is blanket statement good, because that is not true with everyone. I will always have to qualify that statement by saying that it tastes good to me. That the same goes with religious experience. It may be true, right? It may be real that you had a true and real religious experience, but the issue is that it's not real for everyone. Everyone did not experience that love and that peace that God has given you, right? Again, that may be true for you, but it wasn't true for everyone. And that's the difference. Now, some people may not really care about that, about understanding how they can have objective reality and all this other stuff. That may be just be like, look, all I care about is the fact that God changed my life, and that's all I can say, right? I can care less about whether or not you think that's true for you and things of that nature. I just care about my own subjective reality. And look, that's okay to hold on to that subjective experience. Look, I get it, right? Our minds are finite, and there are some things that we just can't grasp and may never grasp about the questions surrounding God. However, for others, this type of blind faith or Kierkegaardian fideism, just won't do. And this brings me to the last group of individuals, which who may respond to this problem of not having an answer to defend their faith about like who created God, which is those who, when faced with this question, might abandon their faith entirely. Right? For some, this question could be the tipping point, leading them to deem faith in God as irrational and thus an untenable belief. And well, if that is you, I want to caution you in this video, because I believe there are some aspects of this question and this conversation that you have to consider, or maybe even reconsider first before throwing in the towel altogether. So let's first start by unraveling the various layers of this question, as some of them are often overlooked in a conversation like this. The first layer that we need to address is the nature of who God is. And to answer that question, who created God, we must first ask ourselves, what do we mean by God? It kind of sounds like Jordan Peterson right here, where he always tries to break down, what do you mean by faith? What do you mean by believe? What do you mean by what do you mean? But in a serious note, I would probe about the person's understanding of God first before I even attempt to answer a question like this, as we may be approaching our understanding of God from two different perspectives. So unfortunately, this is something that is too often overlooked in these types of conversations. We assume that everyone means the same thing whenever they are referring to God, but the problem is that's simply not the case. What one person may mean by God can be totally different than someone else's. You actually see this. I'm just going to use my culture for an example. You can be talking about God in the more traditional Christian sense, and then you go to Africa, they may be like, oh yeah, we're all gods, or we worship sun god, or we worship this other deity. My grandma who passed away, she's now a god, right? Or things of that nature. So you really want to get specific about what do you mean by God, and this is actually quite evident when you just examine theism as a whole, which is why I preface this video by stating that I'm giving the Christian response, because a Muslim God could be different than a Christian God, etc., or Hinduism. They have different gods as well. So if what the person is talking about when they refer to God is a type of Zeus character, right? This is with Greek mythology, of course, then I can understand why they would ask that question, who created God? If my religion was centered around Greek mythology, then I would understand why someone would want to know, well, where did Zeus come from? Right? And I would have a serious problem on my hands, because I really wouldn't be able to give them an answer. Now, would I? It would just keep regressing from Zeus to Kronos, and then so on and so forth, right? Who created Kronos if Kronos is the dad of Zeus? Now, fortunately for myself, I do not hold to Greek mythology. That's not necessarily my religion. Again, I'm a Christian, but I just wanted to use Greek mythology as an example for why it's important to get specific when dealing with an issue like this. If I were defining what I mean when I refer to God, then I would borrow from Anselm of Canterbury and his use of the definition of God that he listed in his book, The Proslogion. By the way, I made a whole video reviewing his book and the ontological argument that he presents in his book. I'm going to leave a link in the description box below for those who want to check that video out a little bit later. I think it's a great book, great read, and I also think it's a great review. I may be subjective on that point, but you can know, obviously subjectively, if you go check it out. But back to this video, in chapter 2 of the Proslogion, Anselm gave his definition of God, and in it he wrote this: and indeed we believe that you are a being than which nothing greater can be conceived. So what exactly is Anselm saying here? Well, he's essentially saying that God is the greatest being that we could think of. He is perfect, which means that he is all-knowing, all-powerful, all-loving, all-just, all-compassionate, etc. That is what he means when he is giving his definition of God in the Proslogion. Now, you can disagree with Anselm's definition of God, but just know that that's where the point of contention lies, right? That's why I wanted to start with this first layer to this question, because I truly believe that we at times are simply just talking past each other, and that's the problem. The issue is not with us trying to figure out who God is, but rather it is with us trying to figure out what we mean when we refer to God. So anyway, this brings me to my second layer, which is the assumption that is baked into the question, who created God? You see, what the person is asking when they ask a question like that is, what they're doing is, whether that be yourself or someone else, is assuming that God is a created being like you and me. And that person is assuming that God had a beginning, which in turn would not make him infinite, or at least it would not make him infinite in the sense that we commonly use the word today. He would be finite, and in turn, he would not be God. Rather, whoever created him would be God and so on and so forth. This is why it is important to peel back that first layer and provide our definition of who God is. What do we mean when we refer to him? Because if we're not careful, we would have tried to answer this question as currently constructed instead of revealing the assumption that is baked into the question itself. That is that God is a created being. Did you kind of catch that? I know sometimes, I don't want to go too fast in this video and think that you're already tracking along with me. So I want to take that part slowly, right? This is actually a lesson that we need to remind ourselves of more often. Active listening is really crucial with questions like these, because if you don't listen carefully to what the person is asking you, then you're just going to end up affirming something on accident that you don't even believe, right? What we should say to a person who asks us this question is, I don't understand this question as currently constructive. Can you reframe it or frame this question for me? Now, obviously, you understand their question, but you want to show them how their question is forcing you to assume something about God that you don't ultimately believe is true. So again, operating from Anselm's definition, we do not affirm that God is a created being, because a being that is self-existent is greater than a being that isn't. It's that simple. Remember, God is the greatest being that we could think of, right? We can think of a being who is self-existent, and that self-existent being is greater than a being that is created, essentially what it is. So the Christian's answer to this question is to reject the question altogether, as it does not even make sense in the Christian context. A better question would be to ask, how is God self-existent? Or something to that effect, because that would be actually addressing the Christian's understanding of who God is, namely a perfect, infinite being. Now, this leads me to my final layer that we have to address with this question. And this is mainly going to pertain to my atheist friends out there who have been using this question as a kind of gotcha moment. What I want every atheist and agnostic to understand is that you have the same problem. Now, technically, this is not a problem for the Christian, as I've just demonstrated, but it is very well still a problem for the atheist, because the question can be just flipped back on your worldview. And unlike the Christian scenario, it will actually be an appropriate question for your response. So the question wouldn't be, who created God, right? Rather, what the Christian is going to do is turn around and ask you, who created the world, right? We know that this world is not infinite. Anyone who takes that position is just not thinking at all. And so if we know the world had a beginning, we need to ask ourselves, who created the world? Now, I know some atheists may say that it is not who, but what. But I believe that answer is just insufficient, because you run into the problem that the Greek mythology ran into. Okay, so what created the world? Oh, this other part created the world. Okay, what created that? Do you see how that kind of goes back? The other problem that you run into is the problem of intelligent design. Even if you hold to the Big Bang Theory, that still doesn't explain how something came out of nothing, or how intelligent beings sprung out of non-intelligent matter, right? Now, you can say we don't know because science has not told us yet, but I seriously doubt that science will ever tell you about something that happened before time began, right? Science can only tell us about what is finite, not what is infinite. And even with that, we still don't know a whole lot, even with the progression of science. Unfortunately, our society has made science into something that it was never designed to be. It was always meant to be a tool to tell us about the world, ourselves, and ultimately point us back to the God who created everything. So with that being said, I wanted to kind of end this video by giving some encouragement to the three groups of people that I was mentioning in the middle portion of this video. So to that person who started to seriously consider Peter's charge, I tell you to look, keep on, and don't lose your faith. right? There's going to be some questions that you're going to run into. You're not going to have the answers to, but I want you to go and search for them. There's some things that we actually don't have an answer to because only God knows, but I want you to keep in the faith. To the person who may be holding on to the type of Kierkegaardian fideism or a type of blind faith, I wanted to tell you to open your eyes and see that our God, who is all wise, did give us reasons to have faith in him that is beyond our subjective experiences. Again, your subjective experiences are not invalidated. They are not less than. It's just saying that our God, who is all wise, has provided us with way more than just our subjective experiences to hold on to. And that's something you got to remind yourself of. And lastly, to the person who has abandoned the faith and threw in the white towel, I want to tell you that it's not too late to pick it back up and keep running the race. Remember that this life is not a sprint, but it's a marathon, right? And he who endures to the end shall be saved, right? It's not saying that he who runs the quickest, right? It's saying that those who endure to the end, there's going to be moments where you're going to feel like, well, none of this makes sense, right? But because none of it makes sense, that shouldn't therefore tell you like, okay, well, let me just quit the whole thing. No, absolutely not. In fact, that should motivate you to dig deeper, right? But that would be my encouragement for each and every one of the individuals that I was speaking to in the middle of this video. All right, guys, that's the video. Like always, please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Let me know what you think about, this whole conversation of who created God, things of that nature. Let me also know what you think about Anselm's ontological argument in the comment section. Obviously, I was drawing from his definition and things of that nature. I want to know exactly what you think about in this video. But until next time, guys, peace.